I never believed in monsters, or magic, or fate, or anything that couldn't be explained by paper, ink, and evidence. Growing up in a fog-wrapped little town at the edge of the kingdom taught me one thing very well. Stories were for other people. People with time, people with imagination, people with lives that stretched beyond fields, ledgers, and the library where I spent more hours than I should admit. At 23, my world was painfully small, but at least it made sense. No myths, no madness, no creatures with glowing eyes and sharpened instincts. Especially not werewolves, whose legends children in my village used to whisper about to scare each other at sleepovers. I always rolled my eyes at those stories. Wolves that walked like men, kings who ruled entire packs, eyes turning gold under the full moon. Please. I believed in cold pragmatism, not folklore. If someone had told me that one night would crack every belief I'd ever held, I'd have laughed. But that was before the King's Winter Masquerade, before I stood beneath chandeliers carved of ice and light, before the whole world tilted because of a single touch. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started far more mundanely, with a mistake. A clerical error, actually. Ironic, considering I was a low-level archivist for the Ministry of Historical Records. A mistake in an invitation list, a misprint in the Noble Registry, and suddenly, I, Arya Clark, humble daughter of a seamstress, was summoned to the Alpha King's annual winter feast. When the delivery boy handed me the letter, I thought it was a joke. When I realized it wasn't, I considered staying home anyway. But curiosity tugged at me in a way I couldn't resist. I may not have believed in fairy tales, but even practical people feel the pull of opulence once in a lifetime. So I borrowed a dress, a simple navy gown that looked out of place among the silks and gemstones of the palace, and wrapped a thin mask around my face, hoping anonymity would shield me. It didn't. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I felt every stare scrape over me. Not out of malice, just indifference. A human girl among wolves, a single droplet of ink in a lake of silver and gold. Not important, not impressive. Just a mistake in the guest list. Nobles swept past me in glittering swirls of perfume and velvet. Servers carrying crystal trays looked through me as if I were part of the marble pillars. Even the orchestra seemed to play loud enough to drown out the embarrassment radiating from my skin. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here to be seen. I found a corner near a pillar, my natural habitat, and stayed there, hands folded, mask slipping slightly every time I exhaled. I tried not to wrinkle the borrowed dress. I tried not to look like I was holding my breath. Most importantly, I tried not to stare at the massive figure at the far end of the hall, the Alpha King, Kale Stormborn, the man who ruled the Sa. Realm's wolves with a force that made nations tremble. I had seen drawings in history books, cold sketches with rigid lines, but none of them captured the reality of him. Tall, unmovingly still, eyes dark as obsidian beneath a silver mask. A presence that seemed carved from winter itself. The nobles circled him like stars orbiting a black sun. No one approached without fear. No one touched him. And why would they? He didn't even appear human. He looked elevated, as though he had been made for a world higher than ours. I told myself not to look, not to wonder, not to imagine. He was myth. I was ordinary. And ordinary girls didn't belong anywhere near men like that. I smoothed my dress, adjusted my mask, and forced my attention to the painted tiles beneath my feet. I just had to make it through the night unnoticed. Then my elbow clipped a nobleman's sleeve and he scowled. Humans shouldn't be in these halls, he muttered. I ducked my head. Sorry. He didn't bother responding. Not one person spoke to me, not even by mistake. And somehow, that familiar invisibility felt heavier here, under chandeliers worth more than my entire home. Still, I stayed in the corner, quiet, small, forgettable, just as I'd always been. But fate, the one thing I didn't believe in, was already shifting beneath my feet. I didn't know that by the end of the night the king's eyes would glow molten gold because of me. I didn't know that the myths I dismissed would rise up and wrap themselves around my life. I didn't know that one touch from my hand would change everything. I didn't know that the Alpha King would look at me, the girl who'd never believed in legends, as though he had finally found one of his own. The girl who didn't believe in monsters was about to discover she had been living beside them all along. The moon feast was supposed to be the most breathtaking night of the year. And it was. Just not for the reasons the bards sang about. The ballroom of the Winter Palace looked like something carved out of frost and dreams. Towering crystal arches, chandeliers dripping with white fire, walls painted with scenes of ancient wolf kings and battles I'd only ever read about. Gold and silver masks glittered like stars scattered across the room. Laughter echoed in polished waves. Every noble in the kingdom of Thaler was here. And then, there was me, Arya, the archivist, human, accidental guest, wearing a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit and a mask that kept slipping down the bridge of my nose. I tried to blend into the stream of people entering the ballroom, but they flowed around me like I was a stone in a river, something to be avoided. I stepped to the edge of the hall, pressing my back against a carved pillar. My heart beat too fast, too loud. This wasn't my world. People glided across the floor, their steps graceful, practiced. Silk rustled. Jewels chimed softly. The scents were dizzying. Floral perfumes, sweet wine, something sharper beneath it all. Something wild. I clutched the invitation I'd been given, still half sure someone would snatch it from me and say there'd been a mistake, that I didn't belong. A pair of nobles passed by, not bothering to lower their voices. That's her, isn't it? Human. Why would the palace let her in? Probably a charity case. Heat crept up my neck. I looked down, pretending the mosaic tiles were fascinating. My dress suddenly felt too plain, my hair too simple, my whole existence too obvious. I took a careful breath and straightened my shoulders. It's one night. You can survive one night. A server hurried by with a tray of sparkling drinks. I stepped aside to avoid bumping into him, not that he noticed me anyway. I started walking, trying to pretend I had a destination. The crowd shifted around me in perfect cold elegance. I didn't look up in time. Someone passed too close, tall, broad, moving with the kind of quiet danger that made the air ripple around him. My hand brushed against an armored vambrace, cool metal beneath my fingertips. "Oh, sorry," I blurted, instinctively backing away. "I didn't mean—" A strange heat prickled along my fingertips. Sharp, electric, alive. I snatched my hand back as if burned. The man didn't stop walking. He didn't turn, didn't react. In fact, he disappeared into the crowd so smoothly it was as though he had never been there at all. But that heat? It lingered. I rubbed my fingertips against my palm, trying to shake the sensation off. Maybe it was just static. Maybe I was imagining things because the room was overwhelming, because the air was warm, because I hadn't eaten since breakfast. Anything rational, anything normal. I forced myself to breathe and kept moving through the ballroom, trying to gather my thoughts. But every step made me feel more like a misplaced chess piece on a board I didn't understand. A noblewoman in a shimmering crimson mask brushed past, her perfume dizzying. Her gaze flicked over me, one quick assessment that took in every flaw, every detail, and dismissed me instantly. Invisible again, except for the lingering heat in my fingers. I found another pillar near the far end of the room and hid behind it, letting the music wash over me. The orchestra played something haunting, violins weaving a melody that felt like moonlight stretched thin. The dancers swirled in perfect circles. Everyone here seemed to know the steps. Everyone seemed made for this world. And then, there was me. A girl who cataloged dusty manuscripts for a living. A girl who believed in facts, not fantasies. A girl who came here because someone in the palace made a clerical mistake. But just as I started calming myself, something shifted in the room. The temperature dipped. A hush rippled across the crowd. I followed their gaze without meaning to. He stood at the center of the ballroom, tall, unmoving, dressed in black with silver embroidery that looked like captured lightning. His mask was carved from obsidian. Even from across the hall, I felt a pressure, like he carried the weight of a storm beneath his skin. The Alpha King, Kale Stormborn. I swallowed, pressing deeper into the shadow of the pillar. The nobles bowed. The music softened. The air itself seemed to bow to him. He scanned the room slowly, his gaze sharp enough to cut. I ducked my head. And then, for the briefest heartbeat, his dark eyes flicked toward the place where I hid. My breath froze. I told myself it was coincidence, a trick of the light. He wasn't looking at me. He couldn't be. I was nobody. A human among wolves. An archivist who'd brushed a stranger's arm. But as my fingers tingled again, warm, electric, I felt a quiet dread curl through my chest. Because deep down, somewhere beneath all the logic I clung to, an instinct whispered back, "You touched him." And I had no idea what that meant. I should have left the ballroom the moment I felt like I couldn't breathe. But I stayed. Maybe because I didn't want to look like the human girl who couldn't handle one noble party. Maybe because I kept looking at the Alpha King without meaning to. Maybe because I wanted, just once, to feel like I belonged in a world that had always felt 2 sizes too big for me. The music rose again, sweeping through the room in a glittering wave. I took a small step back so I wouldn't be in the dancer's way. That's when it happened. Someone shoved past me. Maybe accidentally, maybe intentionally. I stumbled forward with a gasp, arms flailing, and my palm landed against a man's chest. Firm, warm, solid like carved stone beneath fabric. I heard the faint thud of his heartbeat under my hand. Before I could even form an apology, the man froze. Completely, the way a predator stills before a kill. I looked up, and the breath left my lungs. A second ago, his eyes had been black behind the edge of a midnight mask. Cold, uninterested. The eyes of a noble annoyed by being bumped by a human, but the moment my skin touched his, they changed. Gold ignited in them. Not softly, not subtly. They flared, molten and burning, as if someone had lit a fire behind his irises. The entire hall gasped at once, an audible, collective intake of breath that made the chandeliers tremble. It echoed. I froze, my palm still on his chest like an idiot. "What?" I whispered, voice cracking. "What is—" A low sound rumbled from him. Not a growl exactly. Not human either. Something ancient. Something wild. Something that made the tiny hairs on my arms stand straight up. My heart hammered against my ribs. I yanked my hand back as fast as if I'd touched hot coals. The man inhaled sharply, like the sudden absence of my touch physically pained him. "What did I—" My voice broke. His golden eyes followed my movement like I had become the only object in the room. The rest of the world blurred behind him. Music, dancers, perfume, light. Everything else collapsed into background noise. I didn't know who he was. Not yet. I didn't know what I had just done. Not yet. But everyone else seemed to. Because as I backed away, trembling, whispers exploded around the ballroom. "The king. Did you see? His eyes. Impossible. A human? She touched him. How is she still alive? Look at him. He's—" He's reacting. Reacting. To me? No. No. That was impossible. My pulse roared in my ears. The golden in his eyes didn't fade. It burned brighter, as if the intensity fed on my fear. I didn't mean... My voice couldn't find shape. Then he stepped toward me. Not fast, not threatening, but with purpose. A single step. One that seemed to shake the floor. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping on my own feet. I could feel the heat of his stare like a physical touch against my skin. "Wait," he said, voice low, deep, too steady. That tone. It didn't match the chaos in the hall. It sounded almost like pleading. My lungs forgot how to work. I shook my head violently, terrified of something I couldn't name. I didn't do anything. I swear. Another step. My instinct screamed, "Run." Before I could think, my body turned, and I bolted through the nearest archway, the cold air of the corridor slapping my face like ice. My shoes slipped against the polished stone as I sprinted, the sound of music blurring behind me into distorted noise. My hands shook uncontrollably. My breathing came in harsh, uneven gasps. What had just happened? What had I touched? Who was that man? Why did his eyes... My stomach flipped. Werewolves. The old legends whispered around Thalor's borders. The myths I never believed in. Stories mothers told their children to keep them from wandering too deep into the forest. Eyes that glowed gold were the mark of... No, I whispered to myself as I ran. No, no, no. I didn't believe in that. I never believed in that. Magic wasn't real. Wolves weren't kings. Legends didn't wake at a girl's touch. I stumbled around a corner and pressed my back against a wall, chest rising and falling in frantic jolts. My fingers still tingled with that strange electric heat. My own voice trembled in the empty hall. What did I just do? Behind me, far in the ballroom, I heard a sound. A deep, commanding roar that shook the palace stone. A sound that told me exactly who I'd touched, exactly what I'd woken, and exactly why I should have run sooner. But it was too late. Fate, as much as I didn't believe in it, had already found me. I ran. Not gracefully, not intelligently, more like a startled deer bolting into the nearest shadows. The corridor outside the ballroom was colder than the hall, the winter draft slicing through my thin dress. My breath fogged the air as I pressed myself behind an ornate pillar, forcing my lungs to obey commands they refused to follow. Calm down. Just breathe. It was nothing. A trick of the light. A myth layered over exhaustion. Except, the gold in his eyes hadn't been imagined. It had been real. Burning. Alive. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop the shaking. My fingers still tingled where they'd touched him, like the heat had crept beneath my skin. I squeezed my eyes shut. Maybe he'd forgotten me already. Maybe he'd dismissed me as a clumsy human girl who didn't know her place. I clung to the hope, until the ballroom doors slammed open so violently they rattled the chandeliers. Every hair on my body rose. His voice rolled into the corridor like thunder. "Where is she?" My knees nearly buckled. That voice. I had never heard anything like it. Cold, commanding, fractured with something close to hunger. Footsteps followed, long, purposeful strides that vibrated through the marble floor. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Then I heard the guards. "Your Majesty, is there a threat?" A deep growl answered them, a sound that seemed to rumble through the walls. No threat. A pause. Just her. Her. My heart climbed into my throat. He was looking for me. My pulse hammered so loudly I was sure someone would hear it echoing off the stone. I pressed deeper into the pillar's shadow, hands trembling uncontrollably. A guard's voice lowered. "Should we restrain the girl?" A snarl split the air. I slapped both hands over my mouth to stop a whimper. "Touch her. the Alpha King growled, "and I'll break your wrists." The guard practically stumbled backward in a scramble of boots. Oh gods. Not only was he following me, he was warning his own men off like they were rivals. I crouched behind the pillar, trying to make myself smaller than I already was. Smaller than the fear choking me. Smaller than the truth clawing at the edges of my denial. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. But the shadows moved. And I knew. He was close. Too close. I held my breath as a heavy silence fell. No words. No footsteps. Just an instinctual pressure that pressed against my ribs like invisible fingers. Then, Arya. He said my name as if he had known it his entire life. My eyes flew open. He stood at the end of the corridor, half in moonlight, half in shadow. His mask hung lopsided around his throat now, as if he'd ripped it off in the search. His chest rose and fell as though he'd been running. Those eyes, they were gold again. Bright. Wild. Locked on me like nothing else existed. I flattened myself against the cold stone, voice barely a whisper. "Huh, how do you know my name?" He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. "Your scent." My breath hitched. He kept coming. "I couldn't ignore it," he said quietly. "Any more than I could ignore the way my wolf reacted when you touched me." My stomach flipped. "I didn't mean to," I stammered. "I was pushed. I'm sorry, I won't. Touch me again." The words hit me like a physical blow. My mouth fell open. What? He stood only a few feet away now, close enough I could feel the heat radiating off him. Heat that shouldn't have been possible in a cold corridor. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "I need to know what you did to me." "I didn't do anything." He stepped closer, and I had to press back against the pillar to keep some space between us. "You touched me," he murmured, eyes molten, "and something inside me changed." My pulse flew. "Please," I whispered, "just leave me alone." Something flickered in his expression, confusion, surprise, hunger? "No," he said simply. The word vibrated through my bones. He lifted his hand slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "I won't hurt you, but I need to understand." His fingers hovered near mine, waiting for me to close the distance. I shook my head, terrified of what might happen if I did. He exhaled sharply, frustrated, golden eyes never leaving me. "You felt it too." "No," I breathed. "I didn't. You did." There was no arrogance in his voice, no threat, just certainty, recognition. The unmistakable sound of a predator realizing he has found something he never expected to crave. My voice broke. "Please, don't come closer." But he already had, and fate, whether I believed in it or not, had already caught us both by the throat. I don't remember backing away. One moment, Kale Stormborn, the Alpha King, was inches from me, eyes molten gold. The next, I was stumbling down the corridor, palms sweating, lungs refusing to work. "No," I whispered, shaking my head violently. No, this isn't real. This isn't." He followed, but not aggressively. His steps were slow, controlled, measured, like he knew one wrong move would send me sprinting into the frozen courtyard. "Arya," he said softly, too softly, a voice like winter wind carrying a warning. "Don't come closer." It came out thin, breathless. He stopped. The space between us stretched taut as a bowstring, charged with something I couldn't name. Fear, electricity, instinct. I swallowed hard. You're not. This isn't possible. All that talk about werewolves, it's just folklore. Old stories. Scare tactics." My voice cracked. You're just a man. A very intense man with strange eyes." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You touched me," he said again, the words rough with confusion and something darker. And it woke my wolf. My throat closed. Your wolf, I repeated faintly, like the word itself was a weapon. He watched me with an expression I couldn't decipher, part hunger, part restraint, part something that looked terrifyingly close to awe. You're telling me, I said, my voice trembling, that you're actually— I'm not telling you. He cut in gently. I'm showing you. Before I could protest, before I could beg him not to, his hand lifted, but it wasn't a hand anymore, not fully. Right before my eyes, his fingers lengthened, bones shifting beneath skin with a sound so soft it felt impossible. His nails sharpened, curving into dark claws that glinted under the torchlight. Not human, not remotely human. A creature out of whispered stories stood in front of me. I slapped both hands over my mouth, a strangled sound tearing out of me. He froze instantly. His claws, those inhuman, terrifying claws, stopped shifting halfway, as though he'd forced the change to halt. I stumbled back, hitting the wall hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. No. A whisper. A plea. No, please. This isn't real. My legs shook so violently I had to slide down the wall, folding into myself on the cold marble floor. He retracted his hand immediately. The claws faded, pulling back beneath skin as if swallowed by shadows. His fingers returned to normal, beautiful, human, strong. He took a step back, then another, like he was afraid. Of me. His chest rose and fell too fast, too sharp, like he was wrestling something inside himself. I'm scaring you, he murmured. I consent it. I squeezed my eyes shut. Of course I'm scared. Your eyes, your hand, I know, he whispered, and he sounded devastated. I didn't want to show you like that. I pressed my back against the wall harder, as if the stone could shield me from the impossible. My mind raced, crashing through everything I'd ever believed, everything I'd dismissed, everything I'd laughed at. Werewolves weren't real. Magic didn't exist. The world was explainable, rational, predictable. Except the world standing in front of me had just grown claws. Please, I begged, voice tiny and shaking. Don't hurt me. Kyle flinched as though I'd struck him with a blade. I would never hurt you. I shook my head weakly. Your eyes, those claws. How can you expect me not to? Because I'm controlling it, he said roughly, stepping back again, as if distancing himself would calm me. And maybe it did. A little. Enough for me to look up. His golden eyes dimmed, but not fully. They flickered faintly, like embers refusing to die. I don't lose control, he said quietly. Ever. His voice echoed through the corridor, carrying centuries of discipline, iron will, absolute command. Except, he finished, breath uneven. When you touch me. My stomach flipped. I stared at him, willing my heartbeat to slow, willing my lungs to fill. What does that mean? I whispered. He shook his head once. I don't know. I've never experienced anything like it. I didn't move. Couldn't. The world was too sharp, too loud, too unreal. He knelt, slowly, carefully, until he was at eye level with me, close, but not touching, not daring. Arya, he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. I'm not asking you to understand. I'm not asking you to accept this. Not yet. His eyes softened. I just need you to know the truth. He hesitated, and to know that the moment you touched me, something ancient inside me recognized you. My breath caught. Recognized me? As what? But I didn't ask. Couldn't ask. Because fear was slowly, terrifyingly, shifting into something else entirely. Something warm. Something magnetic. Something I didn't have a name for. Not yet. and Kale. Kale watched every tremor in my breathing like it meant everything. I don't remember standing, or walking, or agreeing to follow him. All I remember is Kale offering me his hand, not touching me, just offering, and something in his voice pulling me forward like a tide. "Come," he murmured. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Alone? Funny. I'd never felt less alone in my life, and I wasn't sure I liked it. My legs moved before my mind caught up. I kept a careful distance between us, but he stayed close enough that I could feel his presence like heat, like gravity. The air around him felt charged, humming with something primal. He led me through a side passage toward a smaller chamber, lit only by a few floating witch lamps. The walls were stone, the air cold, but it felt safer somehow. Safer than being in the open. Safer than being surrounded by nobles who had witnessed something impossible. He gestured inside. "Please." I stepped in hesitantly. The chamber was quiet, stripped of grandeur, just stone, shadows, and a low table with maps scattered across it. But before I could fully breathe, the doors shut behind us with a heavy thud. My heart jumped. Kyle turned and spoke to the guards outside with a tone that even stone would obey. "No one enters." I heard armor shift, then silence. We were alone. Again. And somehow that terrified me more than the glowing eyes. Kale took a slow breath, his shoulders rising and falling in almost effort. "Arya," he began, voice carefully controlled. "I need to understand what you are." My stomach plummeted. "I'm nothing. I'm human." His gaze flicked sharply to mine, something dangerous flashing beneath the surface. "No, you're not nothing." He began to circle me, not like a man, like a predator, like a wolf measuring distance, reading air, learning the scent of its focus. He moved slowly, silently, his boots barely whispering over the stone. His presence pressed against my skin, awareness prickling like static. "What are you doing?" I breathed. "Listening." Listening to what? Another slow step, another pass behind me. To what my wolf is telling me. My breath caught. He wasn't joking. He wasn't exaggerating. He meant it. Literally. I could practically feel him reading me, scenting the air, sorting the thousands of tiny things wolves were rumored to notice. Heartbeat, fear, warmth, truth. "It's overwhelming," he admitted quietly, as if confessing a sin. "Your presence, your scent, your heartbeat." Heat shot to my face. My heartbeat? He came to a stop in front of me, eyes dark but simmering. "It reacts to you." That doesn't make sense." "It does to me." I shook my head hard. "This is crazy. You're a king. A werewolf king. You can't just decide I'm whatever you think I am." His eyes softened, but his voice didn't. "I didn't decide." He moved closer, not touching, but close enough that I felt his warmth brush my skin. "My wolf decided." I exhaled shakily. "Kale, I don't even know what that means." "Neither do I," he said, frustration sharpening his words. "That's what terrifies me." It startled me. Him? Terrified? He ran a hand through his dark hair, pacing a short line before facing me again. "I've spent my life mastering control," he said quietly, "over my instincts, my temper, my wolf. No one affects it. No one." His jaw tightened. "Until you." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Because he stepped closer. And this time, I stepped back. Not far. Just enough to feel the cold stone against my spine. "Don't," Kale murmured, pained. "You're not in danger." My voice trembled. "You can't be sure." "I can." His eyes softened, turning molten again. "Because every instinct I have wants to protect you. Not harm you." The vulnerability in his voice nearly unraveled me. He lifted a hand very slowly, palm open, gentle. I won't touch you unless you let me. But I need. He swallowed, almost humanly uncertain. I need to know if it happens again. If what happens? I whispered. He didn't answer, because the moment he shifted his balance, my fingers brushed his. Barely a whisper of contact. But it was enough. His breath hitched. His pupils blew wide, and his irises burned. Gold. Brighter than before. Lit from within. Heat crackled between our hands, something electric racing up my arm. I jerked back with a gasp, clutching my fingers as if burned. Kale's voice came out rough, reverent, almost broken. Your touch calls my wolf. The words hung between us like a vow and a warning. My breath shook out of me. Kale, I don't understand. I do. His voice lowered, intense but steady. Maybe not fully, but I know this. Whatever is happening, it's ancient, instinct, fate. My stomach fluttered, terrified and drawn in equal measure. He took one slow step closer, not touching, not daring, but his voice dropped to something that wrapped around my spine like heat. And it's only happening with you. I couldn't breathe. Fear and fascination twined in my chest, indistinguishable, because even as terror curled under my ribs, something inside me, something I didn't recognize, leaned toward him. The moment Kale stepped back to give me space, I thought I could finally breathe. I was wrong. Because the second the door cracked open, just a sliver, just enough for a stray breeze to slip in, the air in the chamber changed. It tightened, sharpened. Something dark and foreign threaded through it like poison drifting on the wind. Kale's head snapped toward the door before I even registered movement. His nostrils flared. Someone was there. Not a guard, not a courtier. Something colder, hungrier. I felt the shift in him, shoulders tensing, spine straightening, wolf rising beneath his skin. His silhouette seemed to darken, sharpen, as the temperature in the room dropped. A shadow drifted past the cracked door. Just a glimpse. A cloak of dark green, a crest I didn't recognize. A man's voice, low and venom-sweet, whispered to someone beside him. The king's eyes went gold. For a human. Human. The words stung like a slap. Another voice answered, amused, calculating. Interesting. Imagine what the alchemists could do with that. A human who awakens an alpha's wolf? She'd fetch a fine price. My blood froze. Kidnapping. Experimentation. They weren't even saying it quietly. They weren't even afraid. I stumbled back until my spine hit the table behind me, the maps crinkling under my shaking hands. My breath came in broken pieces. Kale's eyes flashed instantly to me. He scented my panic before I said a word. In 2 strides, he crossed the space between us. He didn't touch me, but he didn't have to. His presence was enough to anchor me back into my body. What did you hear? His voice was low, lethal. I swallowed hard. They said that I woke your wolf, and that humans like me could be. My throat closed. His entire expression changed, not anger, not confusion, rage, cold and ancient. He moved past me so fast I barely saw him, slamming his palm against the door, shoving it open with enough force that the hinges screamed. The corridor outside was empty now, but the faint scent of the rival alpha lingered. Spice, iron, and something sour. Kale inhaled deeply, recognizing it instantly. Ravorn, he growled. Of course. He pushed the door shut again, slower this time, but with a finality that made my heart thump. Something invisible wrapped around the room, his power, his aura, his wolf, stretching over the walls like a shield. When he turned back to me, his eyes weren't gold. They were black. Black and bottomless. He took a step toward me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I should retreat or collapse into him, but he stopped just in front of me, close enough that our breaths mingled. "Arya," he said quietly, "listen to me." My hands shook so violently I pressed them against my stomach. I I didn't mean to cause trouble. I'll leave the palace. Tonight. I'll disappear. I'll... He cut me off with a low snarl. "Stop." I froze. Kyle shifted slightly, positioning himself between me and the door, between me and the entire kingdom, it felt like. His shoulders broadened, his stance widening in a silent vow of protection. "No one touches you," he said, voice so deep it vibrated through me, "while I breathe." I sucked in a shaky breath. "But they said." I heard what they said? He took another step, closing the last of the distance. His hand hovered near my cheek, not touching, but close enough that the heat of it soothed my skin. "My wolf reacted to you. That alone paints a target on your back." His jaw tightened. "Not your fault. Never your fault. But they want to take me." My voice cracked. "Why? Because I'm human?" "Because you're rare," he corrected. "Because your touch woke something in me no one has ever stirred." His eyes softened, but the rest of him stayed coiled like a weapon. "I won't let them near you." "But you can't guard me forever," I whispered. "You're a king. You have duties. An entire kingdom." "I don't care." That stopped my breath. He stepped even closer, his voice dropping into something that brushed my spine like heat. "Arya, look at me." I did. "I smelled your fear. Every note of it. And it nearly drove my wolf to the surface." His hand hovered, trembling slightly. The Alpha King trembled, as he struggled not to touch me. "You are under my protection," he said, enunciating each word with quiet fury. "From this moment until I draw my last breath." A shiver ran down my spine, not fear this time, but something far more dangerous. Safety, warmth, belonging. "It's not safe for you out there," he added, gaze never leaving mine. "Not anymore. Not unless you're beside me." I swallowed thickly. "Why me?" The corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile, but something rawer, more honest. "Because the wolf inside me," he murmured, voice turning to velvet and flame, "recognizes you." My heart stumbled. "As what?" He inhaled sharply, like he was resisting the answer. But his final words wrapped around me like a vow carved in moonlight. "Someone worth killing for." Kale didn't take me back to the ballroom. He didn't even take me to the guarded halls or one of the lavish antechambers dripping with gold and moonstone chandeliers. Instead, he led me, silently, steadily, through a narrow side passage that opened onto a balcony overlooking the frozen palace grounds. Winter wind whipped past us, sharp enough to sting skin, but I welcomed it. Cold felt easier than everything burning inside me. The night stretched wide and endless, stars scattered like frost across the sky. Far below, courtiers still danced, oblivious to the storm gathering above their heads. Kale closed the balcony doors behind us. We were alone again. But this time, instead of fear, rushing in, something else came with it. Something heavier, quieter. The weight of truth waiting to be spoken. He stood a few feet away, head tilted slightly as he studied me, not with suspicion, but with intent. Like he was trying to read a language he had never learned. Finally, he spoke. "Why?" he said softly, voice roughened at the edges. "Do you smell like comfort and stormlight?" I blinked. What?" He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough for the air to shift, close enough for the heat radiating off him to cut through the winter's bite. "My wolf speaks in instinct," he continued, "in impressions, scents, feelings." His gaze swept down my form, lingering without shame. "Yours is unlike anything I've known." I swallowed. "You're saying I smell like a weather pattern?" "Not a pattern," he corrected. "A promise. warmth after cold, light after darkness. My breath hitched. He wasn't flirting, he wasn't exaggerating. He was trying to translate something primal into words. I didn't know what to do with that. I turned toward the balcony railing, gripping the cold stone as my pulse fluttered like trapped wings in my chest. Maybe you're mistaken. I'm not. His reply was immediate, certain, almost offended by the idea of doubt. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable, expectant. The wind tugged at my hair, the lanterns below flickering as the feast continued. He waited, and waited, until waiting felt like its own kind of pressure. Finally, I exhaled. Maybe I smell like comfort, I whispered, because I wanted comfort my whole life. His eyes sharpened. Explain. I shook my head. It's not important. It is to me. I looked away from him, out toward the snowy courtyard. I didn't grow up special, Kale. Not important. Not chosen. Not seen. The words came out thin, trembling. People didn't hurt me. Not really. They just didn't notice I was there. His breathing slowed. My father barely remembered I existed, I continued. My mother said I was too quiet, too plain, too forgettable. My classmates didn't invite me to gatherings. I'd show up to town festivals and no one would say hello. I swallowed hard. I learned how to be alone, not because I liked it, but because no one seemed to want me in their space. Kyle didn't move, not a muscle. And I thought, my voice cracked. I thought if I stayed quiet, polite, useful, maybe someone would look at me and see something worth keeping. The night air stung my eyes, or maybe it wasn't the night air at all. But no one ever did. My hands tightened around the railing. So maybe that's why I smell like comfort to your wolf, because I spent years trying to be small enough to live in the corners, trying not to make noise, trying not to be a burden. I let out a hollow laugh. I've been invisible so long, even I started to believe it. Slow steps approached. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Not until his voice broke through the quiet, low, and unsteady. Aria. My name in his voice felt like a vow. I forced myself to face him. What I saw in his expression nearly unmade me. Because the Alpha King, feared by armies, destined to rule a kingdom of monsters, looked undone. His eyes were no longer gold, no longer black. They were human soft, and full of something I had never seen from anyone, let alone from a king. He lifted a hand slowly, as if approaching a wounded creature. You touched me, he said quietly, like I mattered. The breath left my chest. He stepped closer, barely a handspan between us now. No fear, he murmured. No agenda, no worship. Just, he shook his head, emotion tightening his voice. Just touch. Clean. Honest. You didn't shrink away from me. You didn't pretend I wasn't there. You didn't bow or tremble. He exhaled shakily. You touched me like I was simply a man. My heartbeat stumbled. I didn't mean... I know. His voice deepened, thick with something raw. That's why it changed everything. The world fell silent around us. Even the winter wind seemed to hold its breath. My throat tightened. Kale. He didn't move closer. He didn't reach for me. He just watched me with that fierce, quiet sincerity that felt far more dangerous than glowing eyes or claws. You say no one ever saw you, he murmured. But I did. I closed my eyes because the truth of that felt too big, too heavy, too healing, and too terrifying. When I opened them again, Kyle was still there, still watching, still seeing me. Maybe for the first time in my entire life, someone truly did. I should have stepped back. I should have put distance between us, created space, done something, anything, to steady the shaking inside me. But Kale stood so close that the cold winter air didn't matter. Not when his presence wrapped around me like something warm, ancient, and impossibly alive. The balcony lantern flickered between us, a single wavering flame caught between two heartbeats. He watched me with eyes that had gone somewhere between storm dark and ember gold. Not glowing, not shifting, just burning. Arya, he said quietly. My name on his tongue made my breath catch. He lifted a hand, slowly, as though approaching something fragile. His fingers hovered near my cheek, trembling with restraint. I want to kiss you, he murmured. Everything inside me stilled. But I won't, he continued, voice lowering, unless you want it too. I stared at him, this king, this predator, this creature both terrifying and breathtaking, and felt the earth tilt under my feet. Do you want me to? He asked softly. The cold wind swept across the balcony again, but my skin prickled with warmth. His closeness made my heart flutter wildly, an unfamiliar ache blooming beneath my ribs. Should have said no. I was human. He was whatever lived between man and wolf. Nothing made sense. Nothing was safe. And yet, my body moved before my fear could speak. I nodded, barely, faintly, but enough. Cale inhaled sharply. Something in his posture shifted, like he was both relieved and undone. His hand cupped my cheek, warm and steady. I leaned into the touch without meaning to, breath trembling against his palm. Arya. My name came out like a prayer. He lowered his forehead to mine, eyes closing as though the closeness alone was too much. Tell me to stop. His voice was ragged. I'm not saying that. He made a sound, something low, something that shivered through me. Then, with all the gentleness a creature like him shouldn't have possessed, he tilted my chin up and kissed me. It wasn't fierce or claiming or desperate like I had expected from an alpha king. It was slow, soft, reverent, like he was memorizing me, like he was afraid to break me, like he was tasting something he had waited lifetimes for. His lips brushed mine lightly at first, a whisper of warmth, a trembling press. My breath caught in my throat, a sound escaping me that I didn't recognize. He deepened the kiss only when I leaned in, my fingers curling into his coat, needing something to hold onto as my knees weakened. Heat unfurled through me, gentle at first, then sharp, then blinding. My heart felt like it was trying to climb out of my chest. My stomach knotted, my pulse thudded in my ears. But it was nothing, nothing compared to what happened to him. His hand pressed lightly to my waist, steadying me, and I felt the moment something inside him broke open. A warm glow burst around us, subtle at first, then brightening. I pulled back just slightly, breathless, trying to understand. And that's when I saw it. His eyes. They were glowing. Not a flicker. Not a spark. They burned gold. The same molten light that had terrified me now wrapped itself around me like fire and moonlight combined. He kissed me again, deeper this time, and everything in me melted, until he tore himself away from me so suddenly I almost stumbled. He backed up a full pace, chest heaving, eyes blazing bright enough to illuminate the balcony's stone floor. Kyle! I pressed a hand to my lips, still trembling. He shook his head sharply, forcing air into his lungs. If I continue, he said, voice strained, I'll lose control. I blinked, still flushed. You're scaring me. He raked a hand through his hair, pacing once in a tight circle, trying to force his wolf back into silence. No, he said quickly, turning to me. Not like that. I'd never hurt you, Arya. Never. His breathing was ragged. But the way my wolf reacts to you... His throat worked. It's overpowering. My heart pounded. Oh. He laughed softly, bitterly, like he didn't trust himself with the sound. I told you your touch wakes him? He gestured to his glowing eyes. This is what you do to me. I swallowed. Does it hurt? No, he said instantly. It feels. He exhaled shakily. It feels right. Too right. He braced his hands on the balcony railing, struggling to find control. His eyes dimmed from molten to ember light, but they never fully turned human again. I stepped closer, hesitant but drawn. Kale. He lifted his gaze, still half wild. You don't understand. His voice dropped. You kissed me once, and my entire wolf thinks you belong to us. My breath stuttered. That's a lot, I whispered. His jaw flexed. He looked like he wanted to reach for me, and like he feared what would happen if he did. It is, he admitted. And that's why I can't kiss you again tonight. He dragged in one last steadying breath. Because the next time, his voice lowered to a dangerous whisper, I won't be able to stop. Heat rushed through me, leaving me trembling for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Kale straightened, forcing composure back into his stance. For now, he said softly, go inside, before I forget every promise I've made to myself. I nodded slowly, but something in me already knew. That kiss had changed everything. I should have gone straight back to the ballroom. I should have kept to the crowds, kept to the light, kept to Kale's warning that shadows in this palace weren't harmless. But my mind was still spinning from the kiss, still warm from the press of his lips, still shaken from the way his eyes had glowed like molten gold only moments ago. I stepped through a side corridor to steady myself, pressing a hand over my racing heart. Just one breath, I told myself. One breath before I face the world again. I didn't even get half of one. A hand clamped over my mouth. I screamed, or tried to. It came out a muffled, terrified sound swallowed by a stranger's palm. Another arm yanked me backward into the darkness. My heels scraped uselessly against the polished floor. Well, well, a voice hissed behind me, sharp with triumph. The human girl everyone's whispering about. My blood iced. Two men, wolves, definitely wolves, dragged me deeper into the unlit corridor. Their grip was bruising, iron strong. Their nails scraped my skin. Let go, I gasped when one shifted his hand long enough to reposition his hold. Quiet, the first snarled, yanking my head back. Your king can't hear you now. King. Kale. My heart jolted with frantic hope and fear. The second man leaned close, breath sour. Revorn wants to know why the Alpha King's wolf lit up for a human. He'll want samples. Samples. My stomach lurched. No. Please. Let go. My voice broke as panic pulsed through me, hot and dizzy. They didn't care. In fact, they laughed. One of them gripped my arms while the other grabbed my jaw, tilting my head to inspect me like livestock. The humiliation, the terror, they hit me so hard I thought my body might collapse under it. Hold her steady, the first commanded. She's trembling too much. I said. I struggled, screamed again, louder this time. Let go! The sound tore from my throat, raw, desperate, echoing down the corridor. The men cursed. Shut her up! They didn't get the chance, because the air changed, shifted, dropped like temperature just died. A dark pressure rolled through the hallway, coiling around us like smoke. It wasn't human. It wasn't natural. It was him. The wolves holding me stilled. A heartbeat of silence. Then a growl tore through the corridor so deep, so violent, I felt it in my bones. Revorn's men jolted back. Too late. Kale appeared at the end of the hallway like a storm breaking open. Not running. Hunting. His eyes burned gold, bright, lethal, unmistakable. So bright the walls glowed with the reflection. Release her, he snarled. The wolves shoved me forward in panic, trying to use me as a shield, but Kyle moved so fast the world blurred. He grabbed the first man by the throat and slammed him against the stone wall hard enough to crack it. The second lunged at him. Kyle barely turned before he flung him backward with one sweeping motion that wasn't even effort. A sound tore from Kyle's chest, part wolf, part king, all fury. His claws flashed, half shifted. The attackers scrambled, but Kale pinned them easily. A force of rage and instinct barely reined in. "No one," he growled, voice feral, shaking the air itself, "touches what's mine." Mine. The word silenced everything. The wolves froze beneath him, panting, trembling in the face of a predator so dominant their bodies refused to fight back. I froze too. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Something that felt like awe climbing up my spine. He turned sharply when he realized I was still pushed against the wall, arms trembling. In 2 strides he was in front of me, his hands gentle where they had been lethal a second before. "Did they hurt you?" His voice was still dangerous, but softer. Only for me. I'm okay," I whispered, though my knees were giving out. He caught me before I crumpled, one arm behind my back, the other cradling my head as if I might break. "I'm sorry," he murmured, voice raw with guilt. "I should never have let you out of my sight." The glowing gold in his eyes softened but didn't fade. Not fully. Not this time. Guards finally arrived, gasping at the wreckage of broken stone and bleeding wolves. They bowed immediately. "Sire, your eyes—" Kyle didn't look at them. He didn't look at anyone. Just me. "This is the last time," he said, voice low, furious at himself. "The last time anyone touches you without my permission." Emotion swelled in my throat. Fear, relief, something dangerously close to gratitude. He tilted my chin, gently. "I heard your scream." My breath hitched. "How?" A faint smile touched his lips, dark, fierce, unbearably protective. "Because you are mine to hear." The corridor around us blurred. Guards, enemies, ruined stone. None of it mattered. Only him. Only the way he held me. Only the truth in his still glowing eyes. Terror melted into something new. Something warm and terrifying and undeniable. Awe. Because the Alpha King hadn't just saved me. He had claimed me. The throne hall of Thaler had never felt so loud. Hundreds of voices crashed against each other. Nobles in shimmering silks, advisors draped in fur, alphas from minor packs who had traveled days to attend the moon feast. The vaulted ceiling turned every whisper into thunder. And they were all whispering about me. A human. A nobody. A girl who'd walked into a masquerade by accident. I stood near the center of the marble floor, Kale's cloak draped around my shoulders because I was still shaking too hard to stand without it. Guards lined the doors. Advisors crowded the dais. The nobles stared openly, their gazes cutting like ice shards. I should have been invisible. Should have been overlooked like always. But now everyone saw me, because they had seen his eyes glow gold, because they had heard my scream, because Kale had torn through Ravorn's men like he'd been born for war, and because he hadn't let go of my hand since. "Your Majesty!" An elder roared from the front row, slamming his cane against the marble. "This is unacceptable." A chorus of furious agreement echoed through the hall. "She's human. She cannot be trusted. She endangers the throne. The wolf awakening for her is an omen." "An abomination," one voice screeched. I flinched. Kale didn't. He simply shifted his stance, placing himself slightly forward, still close to me, still shielding me without making a show of it. But every movement radiated authority, power, tension drawn tight over bone and instinct. Another noble stepped forward, face flushed with fear and outrage. "Your Majesty, you must distance yourself from her immediately. The court won't stand for a human interfering with royal instinct." A hum of agreement buzzed through the crowd. Kyle didn't respond. His silence was worse than a threat, worse than a snarl, worse than claws. Because it was intentional, dangerously intentional. The High Chancellor, thin, severe, and trembling, tried to be diplomatic. "Sire, the kingdom simply needs clarity. If your reaction was a fluke, we can manage the rumor. But if the girl poses a risk to your control, we must—" "Risk," Kyle echoed, turning his head just enough to make the man go pale. "You believe she is a risk?" "Sire, respectfully, she is human. Humans can't—" Kale's voice sliced through the hall like a blade. "She is not the danger here." A ripple of unease traveled through the crowd. The Chancellor swallowed. "Then what is?" Kale finally turned fully, eyes dark and deadly. "The wolves who tried to take her?" Gasps filled the hall. Whispers burst from every side. "Ravorn's pack? Impossible." "Did they really?" I shifted behind him, suddenly wishing I could vanish again, blend into a wall, dissolve into the stone, disappear from all these eyes that felt sharp enough to wound. But Kale's hand brushed mine, steadying, grounding. It wasn't a grip. It wasn't a command. It was a reminder. You're not alone. The moment our fingers touched, a small jolt ran through him. His jaw tightened. His stance solidified. He stepped forward half a pace, placing himself directly between me and the court. The motion was unmistakable, a shield, a barrier, a choice. The uproar swelled again. "This is madness! She must not stand with the king. She could be a spy. Control yourself, Your Majesty." The last one earned a growl so low it vibrated through my ribcage. Finally, the eldest counselor, snow-haired, steel-spined, spoke with authority. "Your Majesty, for the stability of Thaler, we ask one thing. Assure the court that this human will not be allowed close to you, not until we understand the nature of her influence." A heavy silence fell. Dozens of gazes slammed into me. I should have lowered my eyes, bowed, apologized for existing, like I always did. But something had shifted in me, something born in fear and warmed by the way Kale looked at me like I mattered. I lifted my chin an inch, just an inch. Kale noticed, and the gold in his eyes flickered, barely, but unmistakably. He turned back to the court. "She," he said, voice lethal in its calm, "stays at my side." The hall erupted into chaos, shouts, gasps, outrage, horror. But Kale didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't justify or explain. He simply stood his ground, an unmovable wall of authority, power, and instinct. One of the nobles sputtered, "Sire, surely you don't mean she is—" Kyle cut him off, voice low and absolute. "I said what I meant." I stared at him, breath caught in my throat. Not invisible, not unwanted, not ignored, claimed, protected, chosen. For the first time in my life, people looked at me not like I was nothing, but like I was someone who mattered. Maybe too much. Kale turned slightly, just enough so his voice reached me alone. "You're safe," he murmured. "As long as I stand." Something inside me, something bruised and quiet and forgotten, finally exhaled, and acceptance, fragile but real, took its first breath. The moment Kale dismissed the court, I felt my legs give out. Not visibly, thank the stars, but inside, something buckled. The weight of 100 furious stares, the venom in their whispers, the disbelief, the outrage. It clung to my skin like ash. Kale kept me close as the hall emptied, nobles scattering like crows startled from a sod field. But when the last echo faded and the doors slammed shut, the silence crushed me. The marble floor gleamed, the torches flickered. Snow pressed against the stained glass windows. I stood there wrapped in Kale's cloak, trembling. And finally, the tears broke loose. Not soft, dignified ones, not the quiet sniffles of someone who wanted to be strong. These were the kind that ripped through me. Ugly, raw, painful. Kyle turned instantly. "Arya, I'm not worthy," I choked out before he could reach me. He froze, not because he didn't understand, but because he understood too well. I covered my face with both hands, trying to breathe, trying to swallow the panic, trying to pretend I wasn't falling apart. But the words poured out anyway. "They were right," I sobbed. "I'm human. I don't belong here. I don't belong beside you. I don't belong in any of this." My chest tightened until it hurt to inhale. "You're a king," I whispered. "You deserve someone strong, someone powerful, someone who isn't just an accident who walked into a masquerade she wasn't meant to attend." He stepped closer, slow as moonrise. "Arya." I shook my head fiercely, stepping back until my shoulders hit the wall. "No. Don't try to pretend this makes sense. Don't pretend I'm—" My voice cracked. "I'm not special. I'm not brave. I'm not anything." His expression darkened, not with anger, with something deeper, something that looked like grief on my behalf. He reached out, very slowly, and took my wrist. Not to trap me, to ground me. I didn't pull away. "Look at me," he said softly. I didn't. Couldn't. The tears kept falling, staining his cloak draped around me. He tightened his grip just slightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to anchor. "Arya," he repeated, voice dropping lower, steadier. "Look at me." When I finally lifted my chin, his eyes hit me like a blow. I'd expected gold, or fire, or the storm I'd seen in him so many times. But they were soft, human, soft. Brown with a faint rim of glowing amber, dimmed by emotion I didn't understand. He stepped closer, one hand lifting to cradle the side of my face, thumb catching a tear I didn't know had fallen. "You think you're not worthy of me," he murmured, "but you don't understand." I swallowed hard. "Understand what?" His thumb traced the edge of my jaw, gentle, reverent. A touch so soft it felt like disbelief made real. "You touched me," he said quietly, and I saw for the first time. I stiffened. "Saw what?" He leaned in, not enough to overwhelm, but enough that I could feel his breath warm against my skin. "Not gold," he whispered, "not power. Not the throne, not the wolf." He lowered his forehead to mine. "You," he said. My breath caught. "You," he repeated, voice breaking on the word. "Do you understand how long it's been since I saw something, someone, with anything other than instinct? Duty? Control?" His fingers slid from my cheek to the back of my neck, holding me like something precious. "I felt your hand on my armor," he said softly, and everything inside me, everything I've held together for years, responded. My tears slowed. My chest loosened. Something warm, fragile, impossible, unfolded inside me. "Arya," he murmured, "you woke my wolf not because you're powerful, not because you're royal, not because you're anything the court recognizes." His forehead pressed gently against mine. "You woke it because you're honest, because you don't play games, because you touched me like I mattered. Not as a king, not as a legend." His voice softened even more. "But as a man." A sob escaped me, quiet, broken, full of something too big to name. Cale caught it, his arms wrapped around me slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I melted into him, my cheek pressed against his chest as his cloak wrapped us both in warmth. He held me as if he had been waiting centuries to do just that, as if the space between us had been wrong from the moment we met. "You're worthy," he whispered against my hair. "Not because the court says so, not because of blood, not because of fate." His hand cradled the back of my head. You're worthy, because you're you. The words hit me harder than fear had, harder than danger, harder than gold eyes or wolf instincts or royal fury, because no one, not once, had ever said anything like that to me. I drew in a shaky breath, sinking deeper into the warmth of his arms, the safety of his chest, the steady thrum of his heartbeat. And for the first time that night, the world stopped spinning. Kale held me until my breathing steadied, until the shaking eased, until the doubt quieted, and when I finally whispered, barely audible, "Kale, what if I can't do this?" He tilted my chin again, eyes steady, certain. "Then I'll carry the weight," he murmured. "Just stay beside me." And somehow, in his arms, for the first time in my life, I believed I could. Kale led me out of the throne hall long after the murmurs faded behind the heavy doors. I walked beside him, wrapped in his cloak, feeling the echo of his heartbeat from when he held me. But here, now, the corridors felt different. They felt like the edge of a storm I had already stepped into. Kale didn't speak as we walked. His jaw was tight, his breath measured. The glow in his eyes had dimmed to an ember, but it lived there still, pulsing like something trying to surface again. He guided me through a private passageway lit only by moonlight spilling through tall, narrow windows. The cold marble softened under the hush of the night, the entire palace falling still around us. Finally, he stopped beside a stone archway, carved with runes I didn't recognize. He turned toward me. "We can't delay this," he murmured. I swallowed. "Delay? What?" His gaze dropped to my wrist. My pulse stumbled. "Your safety," he said softly. "Your place." My breath caught. "Kyle, the court already hates me. If you do something, if you mark me publicly." "This is not for them," he said. His voice lowered into something intimate, unshakable. "This is for you." And suddenly I understood. This was not the mating mark, the final one, but something else. A promise, a vow, a shield. He lifted his hand. "Give me your wrist." My fingers trembled as I offered it. Kale's touch, when it came, was gentle beyond reason, reverent, like he was holding something fragile and sacred. My breath hitched as his thumb brushed my pulse. "Your heart," he whispered, "beats too fast." "You're the one causing that," I whispered back before I could stop myself. A flicker, almost a smile, touched his lips. Then he grew serious again. "This will protect you from any pack," he said quietly. "Even my enemies will recognize it. Even my wolf would never harm its bearer." I stared up at him, unable to speak. He lifted his other hand and light gathered at his fingertips, soft at first, then brightening into a shimmering gold that danced like flame. I inhaled sharply. "Kale." "Don't be afraid," he murmured. "I'm not," I whispered. It wasn't a lie. He guided my wrist upward between us and lowered his glowing fingers to my skin. The moment he touched the inside of my wrist, heat spread through me. Not burning, not painful, but warm, like stepping into sunlight. A line of golden light spilled across my skin, curling into a shape I couldn't name, part wolf, part moon, part crown. A sigil unlike anything I'd ever seen. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat, each throb sending a gentle warmth through my arm. I gasped softly as the glow deepened. "What is it?" I whispered. "A king's protection," he said. "A rune drawn only by an alpha-born, and only for one person in a lifetime." My heart stopped. "One person?" He nodded. "You." My knees nearly buckled. The rune glowed brighter, then sank into my skin, leaving a faint permanent shimmer beneath the surface, like light living just under my flesh. I stared at it, stunned. It feels warm," I breathed. "It should." His voice softened. "It's tied to me." I looked up at him, at the man who had torn apart enemies for me, who had stood against an entire court, who now pressed a mark of protection onto my skin like a vow carved in light. Cale. My voice was barely a whisper. He took my hand slowly, carefully, lifting my marked wrist toward his lips. Arya, he murmured, gaze molten. His breath kissed my skin before his mouth did. The moment his lips touched my pulse, the warmth flared, bright, electric, tingling through every nerve in my body. My breath shattered on a gasp, and I curled my fingers, involuntarily, into his coat. His eyes flicked up to mine as he pressed one more slow, deliberate kiss over the glowing sigil. "You're mine," he whispered. The words struck something deep inside me, something that had been cold for years, something hidden and starved. Claim, belonging, not possession, not control, but recognition. A truth spoken aloud. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking. "And you're mine?" He closed his eyes briefly as if the words hit him harder than any battle wound. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "If you'll have me, if you'll stay." The world narrowed to his hands, his breath, the rune glowing softly between us. I had spent my life invisible, ignored, dismissed, but not now, not with him. I leaned forward, my forehead brushing his chest. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. His breath left him in a soft, trembling exhale, as if he'd been holding it for years. The sigil pulsed once more, sealing itself in gold fire. Cale wrapped a hand around the small of my back and pulled me gently, reverently, into his arms. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt claimed, chosen, seen, and I surrendered to it. The journey to the werewolf kingdom didn't feel real. Not the way the human world did. Solid, predictable, quietly indifferent. No, this felt like stepping through a veil I'd never believed existed. Cale kept me close as we rode through the snow-covered forest at dawn, his horse brushing against mine every few steps. The cold bit at my cheeks, but the rune on my wrist pulsed warm beneath the sleeve of his cloak, soft like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I touched it once, still half convinced it might have faded. It hadn't. Kyle noticed. Of course he did. "You're thinking too much," he murmured, riding slightly closer, his voice almost lost in the crisp morning air. "I always think too much. Then think beside me." His tone softened, "As you were meant to." Those words still startled me every time he said them. Meant to. As if there was a place in this world, in his world, that had been missing me long before I existed. The trees thinned, and then I saw it. Moonspire Keep. A towering fortress carved into the mountainside, its stone glowing faintly in the early light. Balconies curled outward like stone wings, and high above, silver banners snapped in the wind, each emblazoned with a wolf's head crowned in moonlight. I inhaled sharply. It was beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful. Cale watched my reaction with quiet satisfaction. "This is home. Your home," I whispered. His gaze flicked to the rune on my wrist. "Yours now." My heart stumbled in my chest. As we approached the gates, massive wolves, actual wolves, stood guard, their forms shifting between beast and man with practiced ease. Their eyes followed Cale first, then slid instantly to me. Recognition bloomed in their expressions. And then, something impossible happened. They bowed. Not to Cale. To me. My breath broke. I think they're mistaken," I whispered urgently. "Cale, they don't know who I am." He leaned slightly toward me, voice low enough that only I could hear it. "They know exactly who you are." The gates boomed open. Inside, the courtyard was alive with movement, wolves training, advisors rushing across stone paths, towering warriors sharpening blades. Every head turned when Cale dismounted, their attention snapping to him like vines drawn toward the sun. Then they looked at me and bowed again. Not a shallow nod, not reluctant acknowledgement, a deep, deliberate bow. My knees nearly gave out. "Kale," I hissed, gripping his arm as I slid off my horse. "They can't bow to me. I'm nobody." He caught my waist before I could fall, steadying me with both hands. "You're not nobody," he said firmly. "Not here." I shook my head, heart hammering. "But I don't deserve this. I'm human. I know nothing about your world. I don't belong among kings and alphas and yet," he cut in softly, "my wolf bowed to you first." I froze. His hands tightened at my waist, gentle but unyielding. "You belong more than you realize, Arya." Around us, wolves continued bowing, warriors, elders, advisors with silver hair and stern expressions. They watched Kale with unwavering loyalty, but they watched me with something else: curiosity, reverence, recognition. As if the moment his wolf awakened to me, theirs had too. I forced myself to breathe. Kale offered his arm, not out of formality, but out of instinct. A way of wordlessly saying, "Walk with me." My fingers trembled as I placed my hand where he wanted it. His muscles relaxed the instant I touched him, the tension in his shoulders easing, breath deepening, wolf settling. "See?" he murmured. "Even this calms him." I shook my head in wonder. "I don't understand any of it." "You don't need to." He guided me forward step by step toward the grand doors of Moonspire Keep. Wolves parted in silence, creating a clear path, keeping their heads lowered as we passed. "You only need to stay close," he added, voice curling warm around the cold air. We walked together. Every step felt unreal. Every breath felt heavier. Every glance from the wolves made me want to disappear and stand taller at the same time. "Kale," my voice wavered. "What if I fail? What if I'm not what they expect? What if I embarrass you?" He lifted our joined hands to his lips, brushing a kiss over my knuckles. "You won't fail," he said simply. "How do you know?" "Because fate brought you to me." His eyes glowed faintly, just enough to steal my breath. "And everything in me knows you're meant to be here." Meant. The word struck the deepest part of me, the part that had never belonged anywhere. As we reached the threshold, Kale leaned down until his lips grazed the shell of my ear. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Don't look down. Don't shrink. Not anymore." My breath trembled. You were meant for this. And for the first time in my life, I believed him. Moonspire Keep glowed with winter fire. Torches lined the stone walls. Silver banners rippled overhead, each embroidered with the crowned wolf sigil of the Stormclaw line. The great hall was filled to the edges, wolves in ceremonial armor, nobles in moon-dyed velvet, elders with silver thread braids denoting rank and wisdom. It felt like the world had gathered here. For him, for us. And for the very first time, I didn't tremble. I stood beside Kale at the head of the dais, the place reserved only for the Alpha King and the one he claimed. His hand rested lightly on the small of my back. Not possessive, not performative, but steadying. A silent message. I'm here. Always. My rune pulsed faintly beneath the sleeve of my gown, warm as a heartbeat. Gold light shimmered across it whenever Kyle's thumb brushed my spine through the fabric. It still felt unreal. Just months ago, I was a human archivist overlooked by nobles, forgotten by crowds, walking through life quietly enough to disappear. Now the kingdom bowed when I walked past. The great hall buzzed with energy, excited whispers, lingering disbelief, awe hidden behind court etiquette. Wolves who once stared at me with suspicion now regarded me with something startlingly close to respect, or curiosity, or both. Are you nervous? Kyle murmured without looking down, his voice a low rumble only I could hear. I smiled, shaking my head. Not anymore. He turned his head slightly, amusement and pride darkening his gaze. Good. I exhaled slowly, taking in the room again. Lanterns cast a soft amber glow across the marble. Beyond the dais, windows framed the snowy peaks like a painting. Everything in Moonspire felt carved from legend, like the stories told around winter fires, and somehow, impossibly, I was part of it. A hush suddenly rippled through the hall, moving from the farthest corners to the center like a wave. Wolves turned, advisors stiffened, elders lowered their heads. Kyle stood straighter beside me, but the silence wasn't for him this time. It was for the moment, for what it meant, for what I had become. I heard it then, a whisper drifting from one side of the hall to the other, soft as breath but sharp as prophecy. The human girl became the Alpha King's mate. Another voice added, the one who lit his wolf. The one fate hid in plain sight. Legend now. My breath caught, not from fear, not from unworthiness, but from something deeper. Belonging. Kale's fingers flexed at my back. His eyes flicked down to me and gold light swirled through them, hot, bright, unrestrained. Not wild, not dangerous, claiming, proud. A warmth spread through me, soothing old wounds, silencing old doubts. For years I believed I was invisible. Here, now, under the weight of his gaze, I had never felt more seen. Kale leaned down, not enough to make a spectacle, but enough that only I could hear him. His breath brushed my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. Aria, he murmured, low and reverent. Do you hear them? I nodded. I do. He angled closer, his lips grazing the edge of my jaw in a touch so soft it nearly undid me. They call you human, he whispered. A pause, warmed by steady breath. But they're wrong. My heart thudded once, hard, insistent. You're not human, he continued, voice sinking deeper, wrapping around me like silk and fire. I swallowed softly. Then what am I? His hand slid from my back to my waist, anchoring me, pulling me just a shade closer. Not wolf, he whispered, gold swirling in his eyes again. Then he bent lower, his lips brushing the place where my rune pulsed beneath the fabric. Mine. The word trembled through my entire body. Not in ownership, not in dominance, but in recognition. A vow spoken from truth, not instinct. He straightened again, and the hall waited, watched, held its breath for the reaction they feared or expected. Instead, I smiled. Not the small, apologetic smile of the girl who once hid in corners. A real smile, steady, warm, sure. Because I believed him. Because he believed in me. Because the human girl who didn't believe in magic had stepped into a world carved from myth and found her place at its very heart. Kale's hand found mine. The hall bowed, one unified motion, heads lowering, power rippling through the chamber like a living force. And above the whispered reverence, the flickering torches, the snow-blown windows, I felt it. A quiet certainty blooming where fear once lived. I was no longer invisible, no longer alone, no longer uncertain. I was Arya, the girl who woke a king's wolf, the girl who became legend. And at Kale's side, beneath the swirl of gold in his eyes, I finally understood. I had been his, long before either of us knew it.